Hello, everybody. Thank you for being here. It is my great honor to welcome you to this last panel for us. So we're having the last panel as well at the first floor. And I'm happy that we are finishing with two topics which are very close to what me and Dragana Stojanovic, who is sharing the art and the Holocaust panel, are actually the topics that we deal with at ShoahLab here at the Institute a lot. We also had a good introduction, I think, with our tour at our semester today about how, whether it doesn't matter if we're talking about architecture, historical period, and artwork, we somehow always come back to narratives and politics. It's actually for me very interesting that our three speakers today, Žarka Svirčev, who will be joining us online, Katarzyna Taczyńska, and Natalija Perišić actually reflect this issue in an interesting way. I'll tell you how. So we have Žarka and Katarzyna, who are literary theorists, and actually speaking about through different mediums, real historical persons who are dealing with real political issues. And then we have Natalija Perišić, who is coming from the Faculty of Political Science, talking about a fictional character, a literary fictional character. And this, I think, reflects very interestingly how these things are layered, how complicated things get when we talk about narratives and politics. My own research, especially coming from a country that I'm coming from, where history of the Holocaust is such a contested narrative, is such so politicized narrative, where politics of memory are complex and far more far-reaching than our region, that I came to this idea that we really need to understand these political layers, but we also need to understand that when we are talking about mediums representing the Holocaust, we are always talking on some kind of communication. And then when we see this through lens of communication and not through lens of representation, which is laden with politics, we can maybe come to the important question. And in communication studies, this important question will be: who is speaking? What way is she using to speak? What is the message she is trying to send? So I think that for me, these three speakers today are going to be very valuable for my own research, for both in terms of how we can see the local history and wider European history here overlapping, but also in terms in what way communication about the Holocaust from World War II until now is manifested. So, without further ado, welcome again to the panel Narrative and Politics. My name is Vera Mevorah. I am a research fellow here at the ShoahLab Holocaust Studies Laboratory of the Institute of Philosophy and Social Theory, University of Belgrade. Our first speaker today is Žarka Svirčev. Žarka is a senior research fellow at the Institute for Literature and Art in Belgrade. She is the author of several publications. One of them is That Identity, Deconstruction of Gender Stereotypes in the works of Dubravka Ugrešić, then Vinaver's Literary Republic, then Portrait of the Predecessor Draga Dejanović, and then lastly, Avant-Garde Women, Essays on Serbian Female Avant-Garde Literature. Žarka is an editor of Conference Proceedings book Women's Movement, 1920-1938, together co-edited with Jelena Milinković, and Proceedings book of a conference about becoming a woman writer. Her talk is Women Writers and the Holocaust in the Jewish Almanac. So before giving a word to Žarka, I just want to note that I'm very happy to be hearing that somebody prepared a lecture about the Jewish Almanac, because this is maybe the only and the longest existing Jewish periodical local to Serbia. So I'm very excited to hear about Žarka's research. Žarka, please.
Okay, thank you, and thank you for introduction, especially to introduction in our complex topic. I'm happy to be with you today. Yes, the Jewish Almanac, published from 1954 to 1961, is definitely the most significant place of self-representation, the Jewish community in socialist Yugoslavia, and its communication with a transnational context. It is a multidisciplinary, secularly orientated publication, aspires to a broader community. One of Jewish Almanac distinctive function is commemorization and memorialization of Second World War and Holocaust. And Almanac has developed a hybrid platform of cultural memory, and a different paradigm of memorialization intersect. The genre stratifies concept or strategies of memorialization. So in articles and essays, the memorialization was consistent with state official narrative. It means that the dominant narrative was the anti-fascist struggle and liberation movement, and the cult of the fallen fighter had a central position. In the spirit of socialist brotherhood and unity, the memory of the victims of fascism did not include their ethnic specificities. So the general politics of remembrance did not address the Holocaust, and the representation of the female Jewish community in Almanac also fits into this narrative. Edita Weiss' text, Women's Participation in Jewish Public Work in Yugoslavia, is exemplary in this light. In the context of Second World War, the key figures are female fighters and members of resistance movement. That is the participation of Jewish women in the illegal actions of Communist Party during the 30s. This article, and of course many other articles, articulated the awareness of specific position and suffering of Jews during Second World War, but the representation was shaped by the official discourse of memorialization and the similar discursive practice we have in biographical articles about Jewish women. However, Jewish Almanac had a highly substantial literary section, which included at least a third of each session, and the editor of the literary section was Ivan Ivani, one of the most important Holocaust writer in Yugoslav and post-Yugoslav cultures. And the literary section provides a different strategy than the official discourse of the cultural memory, because the dominant theme in the literary section was the Holocaust. And some previous scholars shown that literature pointed to the blind spots of representation and memorialization of various experiences of the Second World War in Yugoslavia, and Jewish Almanac supports this thesis. And we can say that literature during the socialist Yugoslavia was a privileged place of the remembrance of the Holocaust. Nevertheless, Jewish Almanac also points to the one blind spot of literary studies, even today, masculine experience as normative and prevailing patriarchal interpretative norm. Numerous women writers have published in Jewish Almanac: Frida Filipović, Julia Najman, Miriam Schreiner, Maja Zrnić, Eva Tičak-Weiler, Sonja Nachman-Premeru, Zora Dirbar, Dalila Lea Stern, Mirjana Papo. And of course, all these women deserves biographical presentation, but in this short format, I will focus on the narrative they articulated in Jewish Almanac. They published prose, poetry, and drama, and these texts are essential in mediating memory from the private sphere into the cultural field, the memory of an experience marginalized by historiography and official discourse. And these texts depict a different emotional landscape and seek to legitimize specific experience as traumatic experience in the public sphere. And they are particularly significant because women created narratives about their own experience. Those are highly gendered texts from a women's epistemological, experiential positions about precisely that position in the Holocaust. Of course, it is challenging to single out the typical features of this literary text, and perhaps this is one of the key features, the diversity of women's experience during the Second World War and Holocaust. So the women's experience is not reduced to one paradigm. You see generational differences, class differences, cultural peculiarities experienced in partisan units, refugees, shelters, and camp experience. In the poetic sense, the psychological story and drama is privileged, and the subjective, intimate form of narration. And what is interesting, the whole corpus is fictional. Of course, if we know biographies and if we crisscross these texts and biographies, we can discuss the autobiographical subtext of this story, but the corpus is fictional. The topics that stood out are the topic of motherhood and sexual violence. Women authors write a narrative about motherhood that redefines traditional views of motherhood, grounding it in agency not traditional ascribed to women, at least not to middle and upper class women. And the most expressed motive in the context of motherhood is separation from the children and women's choices in crisis, whether to stay with the children or give them to someone to care for, or to escape without children. And the theme of motherhood is provocatively shaped in Mirjana Papo's short story, The Letter Was Found, one of the outstanding literary texts in Jewish Almanac. After the camp's liberation, a brief summary of the story, Red Cross workers found the letters that a woman wrote to her husband and son from the camp on toilet paper. She has written about her relationship with a Jewish boy who secretly stayed in barracks of non-Jewish women after his mother's murder in the camp. The narrator is in the camp as a political prisoner, hiding that she is Jewish. And this story is highly intense in description of psychological and emotional state, and especially the cruelty of the Nazi biopolitical camp regime and need for others and loneliness in the camp. And eventually, the woman reveals her identity. She chose to reveal her identity and die with the boy in the gas chamber. She didn't want him to die alone. We can interpret this decision as a confirmation of humanity, accepting motherhood as a social role, social position, is an act of confirmation of humanity, morality based on ethic of care for the other, especially if the other is weaker or powerless. But this story's essential problem is the issue of choice. This story and many other stories in Jewish Almanac denaturalize motherhood and mother's decision. Women choose to die with children, with their children. And these aspects of the story reflect the emancipatory aspect of the narrative about motherhood. The women writers in the Jewish Almanac problematize the self-understanding of these choices and action. Choosing to die with a child, hiding with children, caring for one's own life and the lives of children, and separation from the children are the traumatic experiences. Two stories deal with sexual violence in the camp. Eva Tichak-Weiler's short story, Meeting on the Adriatic, published in 1956, is about sterilizing and experiments on Jewish women in camps. The story takes place in the post-war period and addresses the impossibility of overcoming the trauma of sterilization. But moreover, the story addresses the social framework that exposes victims to constant re-traumatization because they cannot fulfill one of the primary roles of woman, being a mother. And actually, the story addresses the patriarchal pressure on perception of victims and their reintegration into society. And the issue of sexual violence is open in Julia Neimann's story, Ricky's Back, published in 1954. It is a nightmarish narrative about sexual abuse in the camp. And the story is shaped as a traumatic narrative from Ricky's perspective, emphasizing her experience and processing of trauma. And this is the key. The story is devoid of any ethical dilemma, suggestions, and similar. But another text in Jewish Almanac perhaps best illustrates the radicality of this poetic choice. Sexual violence in the camps and the social perception of this crime is the subject of the play The Doll by George Leibovich, published in 1967. And this text points out that sexual abuse is among the most sensitive and taboo topics. And The Doll shows that people are willing to understand many acts and action in so-called gray zone or choiceless choice, but not the women forced to have sex in camp brothels. It is all allowed to do in a camp for a living, but not to be raped, rather to die than to survive that way. And of course, Leibovich addressed the patriarchal stigma and redistribution of guilt and responsibility. And despite this, the female authors wrote about women's traumatic experience in their wide range. And yesterday we have opportunities to hear something about Frida Filipović from my colleague Stanislava Barać, and Filipović's feminist position in narration of sexual abuse is definitely correspondence with women writers in Jewish Almanac. So to conclude, we can think of women writers' text in Jewish Almanac as a collective emancipatory project. They use the Almanac platform to legitimize the female experience of the Holocaust. They intervened in the memory politics of socialist Yugoslavia, and they intervened in the masculine and patriarchal patterns that legitimize categories such as traumatic experience, victims, and crimes in the social sphere. And they have done that before feminist historiography or feminist jurisprudence. It is an extraordinary aesthetic activism of the women writers in Jewish Almanac, and the legacy of that activism should be mapped and explored in the context of later Yugoslav and post-Yugoslav war conflicts and women's traumatic narratives and activism. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Žarka. It seems like you just got it started. I'm actually very sorry that we only have this 15 minutes limit, but I'm thinking that the other presenters are going to continue this discussion in a great way. So welcome when this discussion time. So our next speaker is Katarzyna from the Institute of Slavic Studies, the Polish Academy of Sciences in Warsaw, coming to us from Poland. Katarzyna is also currently a researcher at University College Dublin in one very interesting project, especially for our panel, which is titled When Nationalism Failed, a comparative study of Holocaust museums enact collaborationist countries. So I'm guessing the tour today will be quite interesting to you as well. Yeah. Okay, so Katarzyna is a literary scholar, but also a researcher in Balkan, Slavic, Polish, and Jewish studies. She's the author of a monograph, A Joke That Stretched for 2.5 years, The Portrait of Goli Otok in Serbian Literature and Historical Discourse at the end of 20th and the beginning of 21st century, published in Polish, and of many scholarly articles. She is the editor of the series Get to Know the Balkans and a member of the editorial staff of Flavia Meridionalis. I would also mention that she is a member, she's the vice chair of the Polish Commission of Balkan Culture and History, and cooperates with the Bente Khan Foundation in Wrocław on projects related to Jewish culture. Her main interests are contemporary culture in the context of memory in Eastern and Southeastern Europe, Holocaust studies, historiography and literature, and art created by Jewish women in the Balkans. So we're very, very happy of having you here. As I already mentioned, Katarzyna is going to offer another reading of narratives and politics in her presentation, Minsk, My Minsk, the Old Bolshevik, Sara Kagan's poetry as a mirror of transformation and development of secular Jewish culture in the Byelorussian Soviet Socialist Republic. So without further ado, Katarzyna, please.
Thank you very much, Vera, and I'm really happy to be here with you and share my thoughts about Sara Kagan and her poetry. I discovered recently this person for myself and for one of my projects. So I'm happy that I have this opportunity to share with you my thoughts about her. Yes, so I will speak mostly about the time before World War II. But Sara Kagan died during the Holocaust in 1941 in the Minsk ghetto. Okay. So in her 2018 monograph, Kol Isha, The Voice of Women in Yiddish Poetry from the 16th Century to 1939, literary scholar Joanna Lisek writes that, quote, Yiddish language works created by the Soviet Union women remained virtually unknown and on the periphery of the canon, end of quote. It seems to me that the work of women associated with the area of today's Belarus was even more forgotten. The Jewish past of Minsk, a city once called the Jerusalem of Byelorussia, was erased from the official historical narrative for many post-war years. Although her name, Sara Kagan, does not appear in Lisek's monograph, she is by no means an anonymous writer in the context of the contemporary Belarusian culture. However, so far, she has only been mentioned as a reference point in cultural and literary studies devoted to other subjects. These references were usually limited to a brief biographical note and a list of her works. Today, I would like to present an overview of Sara Kagan's poetry, the artistic works of a Jewish writer from Belarus who created her works in Yiddish and died in the Holocaust. I chose to focus on poetry because this type of literary work reacts very strongly to the externally introduced changes, becoming a site of formal and linguistic experiments, especially in the 1920s and 1930s. Little is known about the life and background of Sara Kagan, and in-depth archival research cannot be undertaken at the moment because of the current political situation in Belarus, and not to mention the anti-Semitism. That is why I treat Kagan's literary work both as her testimony and as a repository of knowledge about the writer herself. So Sara Kagan, Sore Kagan, was born in 1885, and she made her debut late, probably as late as the 1930s. Her volumes of poems, In Weg, Mein Heimland, Unsere Menschen, as well as a collection of short stories, Der Erste Penie, were published in the decade preceding the war. In 1941, she published also a novel titled Der Hitler. Kagan created her works during an extremely important moment of development of Soviet Yiddish culture, just before and during the time when it was severely limited by the Stalin Soviet state, especially in the 1920s. And in the first half of the 1930s in the Soviet Union, the country hosted the second biggest number of European Jews at the time, and then played an important role in the evolution of the entire world's Jewish culture. The poetic works of Sara Kagan present the Jewish culture captured at the watershed moment, when the old had to give way to the new. In Kagan's work, the lyrical subject actively participates in social life in order to implement the socialist ideals and foster the right attitudes. Because of their incorporation of the Soviet ideology, her poems are deemed to be pretentious and maybe even clumsy. Such opinions are justified, but in my opinion, they also simplify the meaning of her poetry. Let us first take a look at the background of the social changes brought about by the victorious communist revolution, which resulted in establishing the Union of Soviet Socialist Republics in 1922. Kagan's home country, the Byelorussian Soviet Socialist Republic, was one of the 4 founding members of the Soviet Union. Jews were actively involved in the creation of the Soviet culture, in their case expressed primarily in Yiddish. Thanks to the Soviet state policy, in the 1920s, the Soviet Union was the only country in the world with state-sponsored publishing houses, writers, and schools. They were meant to create a new culture expressed in Yiddish and based on the socialist ideology. It was meant to be a secular Jewish culture that would implement the Soviet policy. The first step to achieving that objective was the education of the Soviet Jewish intelligentsia. The language category became an important component of national identification for Jews, more important than for Ukrainians or Belarusians, who could also construct their national identity on the basis of the territory. Yiddish was chosen as the only language that could be used to define the Soviet Jewry. The authorities reduced the influence of Hebrew, which was strongly associated with the religious sphere of life and with Zionism. In the Byelorussian Soviet Socialist Republic, Yiddish gained the status of a state language, as the language of one of the 4 main national groups, the other 3 groups being Belarusians, Poles, and Russians. This new Yiddish-based concept of Soviet Jewry required, on the one hand, the particular communist-oriented secular modernization of Yiddish, and on the other hand, the creation of a culture that could become a basis for the new collective identity of the group. This dual role of language resulted in Yiddish acquiring a new status in the political, academic, and everyday life of Soviet Jews. The geocultural character of Minsk as a provincial place without a historically rooted homogeneous national culture made it easy for Jews to acculturate quickly in new professional sectors and also gain an important status as a group in the city's political life. Many of Sara Kagan's poems can be, as I said, considered tendentious works created under the dictates of the socialist requirements enforced in Soviet literature. They are filled to the brim with symbolism and values of the Soviet cultural space, following the path laid down by Maxim Gorky. Sara Kagan clearly described her approach to literature in her poem, which I called her Manifesto, Ruf und Arbeitenschlager in der Literatur, the appeal of literary shock worker, which opens the volume in back. The collection begins with a clear declaration of the writer's position, which sounds like a call from the Stachanovite. You called me, the land, so I came, as always ready for struggle and victory. Not once did my hammer win. No, now my pen will face the fight. The lyrical subject presents herself as a soldier, a builder who responds to the call of the country for which she wants to fight and win. Kagan expresses here the ideas would later form the ethos of the Stakhanovite movement, named after the legendary achievements of Alexei Stakhanov, who exceeded his coal mining target by about 1,400% in 1935. As a Jewish writer-worker, Kagan wants to participate in this production movement by meeting and exceeding production targets. However, her weapon of choice in this fight for progress will not be a rifle or a hammer, but a pen. In the next stanzas, the subject announced that she will create her art from the cement, so that is hard as rock and heavy as lead, and she will file her words to ensure they fit into the building under construction and can take their right place inside. The Bolshevik Revolution brought important changes not only in the social political sphere, but also in the moral and gender context. The women's question became a significant element of the politics of the Communist Party. In the new Soviet order, women's life had to change. First of all, they had to free themselves from the dark forces of religion, join the party, and become active in the newly established Soviet institutions. In the new reality, women, Jewish and non-Jewish alike, could move freely, get educated, acquire technical and medical knowledge, and enter all sectors of the urban economy. Like many others, women also moved to Minsk in the 1920s in search of employment opportunities. Jewish women, like men, hoped to find work as teachers or cultural activists in the newly established Soviet Jewish schools and institutions. As I have already said, very little is known about Sara Kagan's private life, so it is difficult to trace the specific reasons motivating her actions. She was born in the village of Maksimovichi to a large family. She was one of 10 children. Her father worked in forestry. Her mother was a housewife. It is also known that Kagan worked as a head of the municipal library in Belarus and moved with her family to Minsk in 1935, following the suggestion of the municipal party organization of the Jewish section of the Writers' Union. After the move, she began evening studies at the Faculty of Philology of the Byelorussian Pedagogical Institute. Kagan was also a mother of 3 sons. So, how did she reconcile these social roles? Unfortunately, her poems do not provide an exhaustive answer to this question. However, it is possible to make some assumptions, as her poetry is permeated with visions of revolutionary happiness, which allows to speculate that for Kagan, the new reality was, above all, a chance for education and becoming a writer. It seems that Sara Kagan was an exceptional phenomenon among the Minsk literary scene. She was also a member of the editorial team of the Yiddish literary magazine Stern, where important artists such as Moshe Kulbach, David Hofstein, and Shmuel Halpin published there. As Elisa Bemporat notes, the analysis of the magazine's content clearly shows that participation of women's voices in its creation was very limited. In 1932, there was only 2 poems by women that were published in Stern. One of them written by Sara Kagan, the second one was written by Rivka Rubin. In 1932, Sara Kagan was the only woman member of the Jewish section of the Writers' Union of Belarus. Undoubtedly, Kagan identified strongly with the ideology of communism. The ideological framing is therefore the basic interpretative framing of her work. Additionally, the desire for emancipation and faith in cultural development are usually strong in socialist states. Sara Kagan's poetry testifies to the existence of such a cultural formation in the Belarusian Soviet Socialist Republic. But does it mean that looking for elements from outside this ideological framework in Kagan's poetry is futile? Are there no records of her personal experiences or any artistic gestures that do not fit within the ideological framing to be found in her poems? Kagan's poetry captured the image of traditional Jewish culture at its turning point, as I said, when the old was giving way to the new. The non-presence of the old is overwhelming in poems which are devoid of Jewish signifiers and associated only with things that are bad and poor, at least in the published texts. Nevertheless, it seems to me that there are some places to be found in Kagan's poetry that are not obvious, but represent certain, I call it, features that testify to both the awakened intellectual aspirations of the poet and the sensitivity for which there was no place in the official narrative. In Sara Kagan's works, you can follow the working class political dimension of her work and try to study them as the output of the only member of the Jewish section of the Union of Writers of the Byelorussian Soviet Socialist Republic. We can also choose a geographical focus and look for traces of national and regional sites and elements of the cultural landscape, like in the poem In Minsk. But in Kagan's poetry, we can also explore themes that are considered to be characteristic of women's works, such as the mother-daughter relationship. After moving to Minsk, Sara Kagan continued to work, taking care of her home and 3 sons. It is also known that one of the children died of pneumonia in the second half of 1930s, which affected her badly. There is no place for death as an individual experience of loss in socialist poetry that focuses on a young, dynamic, and developing world. Of course, people as collective die for a just cause, but there is no tragic dimension to death. The ideas triumph over death. However, when Kagan went through this difficult period, she continued to write, or at least publish poetry. The 1948 volume Mein Heimland is her only publication that opens with a dedication, Dem Ondenk von mein lieben Sohn, in memory of my beloved son. That's all. The only words addressed directly to a loved one. Perhaps the poem Bagagenish, the meeting, represents the meeting of the mother with her lost son, who fleetingly reappears in the mother's imaginations, saying, Ich hab in Himmelen bloße Sie getrogen. I took off to the blue sky. In the poem, the son is replaced by the daughter Kagan never had. Perhaps it was easier for her to write about a non-existent daughter. It's a question. Perhaps this is Kagan's ways of processing the loss of her beloved son. So, conclusion. The here presented considerations certainly do not reflect the full potential of analyzing Sara Kagan's works. I think, however, that her poems, even in this interpretation, reveal various shades of her work. She, although today practically absent from the literary discourse in Belarus, is not an unknown figure. I would like my work to be one of the first steps toward evoking the reader's interest in the work of this Jewish and Belarusian poet, writing at the time when important changes occurred in the Jewish culture in today's Belarus and more broadly in the Soviet Union. Analyzing Kagan's poetry aligns with the trend of researching smaller literary centers in Yiddish culture. It also contributes to new research on Jewish culture in both Soviet and contemporary Belarus, deepening our nuanced understanding of Soviet culture and highlighting its microhistories closely entwined with local context. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Katarzyna. I will introduce our last speaker right away. This is Natalija Perišić from the Faculty of Political Science at the University of Belgrade. Natalija is a full professor of social policy at the University of Belgrade Faculty of Political Science, Department of Social Policy and Social Work. She lectures on national European welfare states, aging, and migration on all university levels. She is also a lecturer in Immigration Studies Master's Program and a visiting professor at the University of Eastern Sarajevo, Department of Sociology with Social Work, Bosnia and Herzegovina. She is a Vice Dean for University Undergraduate Studies at the Faculty of Political Science and the coordinator of Migrant, a project funded under the European Union Horizon 2020 scheme. Her scientific research and research interests include nexus between aging, migration and welfare state, national and European social policies, and gender perspectives. She has been published extensively in national and international journals, and she has been contributed to several edited books. As we mentioned, Natalija will actually talk to us about a well-known Holocaust narrative, but from a very unique perspective. And what I'm happy that we're going to be hearing a post-Holocaust narrative being explored here. So her presentation is titled Implications of the Holocaust for a Woman Experiencing a Post-Holocaust Migrant Integration with Sophie Zawistowska. Natalija, please, thank you.
Thank you very much. It's good to be here at the very end. And as I will argue, there is nothing political in Sophie's activities in stricto sensu, on the one hand, and on the other hand, there are so many things about narratives. Actually, narratives are not just narratives. They impact people's lives, and that is something that we have to deal with. Another thing for women traditionally is who owns actually narratives and who should own the narratives and whose voices we should hear. And also one thing in reflection to what Žarka said at the very beginning, she was mentioning Edita Weiss. I'm sorry that I had to look at the name. Just a small tribute to Edita Weiss, because she was professor of social policy at the Faculty of Political Science, from which I'm going, and she actually founded international and comparative social policy at the university level. So I am beginning my presentation. On the very left, you can see the first book covers. On the very right, you can see the Serbian version of the book covers. Up, you can see two additional additional book covers, and on the top, these are posters for the movies. It was 1979 when William Styron published the novel, and it was 3 years later when the novel was filmed, starring Meryl Streep, Kevin Kline, and Peter McNichol. Sophie's Choice is a fictional but historically based story narrated by Stingo, a young writer-to-be at that moment. After settling into a rooming house in Brooklyn in what he calls hectic summer of 1947, Stingo meets Sophie, a beautiful woman in her late 20s. The occasion of their first encounter is emotionally challenging for Stingo. He is immediately attracted to Sophie. He witnesses a horrible fight between her and her lover, Nathan. And he also gets to know that Sophie is a Holocaust survivor. He sees purple 5-digit number on her arm. So the three, Stingo, Sophie, and Nathan, get to spend time together. The story reveals Nathan as a promising scientist employed with Pfizer, only to be discovered during the time that Nathan is actually doorman there, being diagnosed with paranoid schizophrenia and that he abuses drugs. His occasionally extremely violent behaviors, first of all towards Sophie, can be now explained. And their relationship is so obsessive and impulsive with ups and downs that it finally ends in their suicide. So Sophie's Choice is, on the one hand, a novel of a devastating love relationship between Sophie and Nathan, with Stingo taking his part too. And it is central in the book in the present time, and the present time is 1947. But my focus clearly is not on this love relationship, even though I will come back to that later because it has very strong connections with the Holocaust. So what is my focus then? As the story progresses, Sophie is narrating her past to Stingo, to his and to our readers' increasing horror. And her past points critical points of her current integration in 1947. Past contains enablers and disablers of Sophie's post-Holocaust life, and her experience of Auschwitz is one of the most important factors of her possibility to integrate into society, not to mention that this is a milestone for the integration, or better to say, disintegration of her own personality. Why is so? Why is the experience of Auschwitz so overwhelming for Sophie, for Stingo, and a reader? It is needless to mention here objective, hard data and numbers about Auschwitz, they're from the history. But still, even today, having all evidence in front of us, it is very hard to explain it. Also, we have a kind of paradoxical situation. On the one hand, and as mentioned in the novel, George Steiner claimed that silence is the answer, that it is the best not to add the trivia of literature, sociological debate to the unspeakable. Even though we cannot but to agree to this, we have to say that literature cannot be silent on this topic. And for that reason, I'm trying to understand this. So Stingo narrates of Auschwitz as petty sinkhole of her, Sophie's past, end of quote. And it is by no means a place that cannot be explained by using conventional terms. And if we would have to use one term, it would be the term of evil, as evil in itself, both in its universalism on the massive scale, as in its banality and details. And this is a horrifying lesson of the ableism of evil. And Auschwitz was a real objective structure and organization of evil, made almost perfect with its technology of dehumanization of people. Of course, the structure was not enough. The structure and institutions of evil needed people, perpetrators to execute the evil, and they were numerous in the novel. There was a whole bureaucracy of evil in Auschwitz, as we see in the novel too. On the top of its structure, it was Rudolf Hess. It will be very important later. There was his male and female keepers. There were ordinary people around. And this is not the end. I will also take into account some another things, what is called anatomy of the human misery. There is also one quote by Simone Weil saying, this imaginary evil is romantic and varied, while real evil is gloomy, monotonous, barren, and boring. So, who is Sophie? The main character. Sophie is a Polish-born Catholic, a daughter, a widow, and a lover, mother to 2 children, an immigrant to the United States of America, and the Holocaust survivor. There are so many contradictions, and we should ask again, who is really Sophie? Not only does she have multiple identities, like any other person, and multiple intersections between these identities, but she also has some very complicated intersections that bring a lot of tensions, first of all, to her. She's everything but a certain clear type. Also, would we not expect that Sophie is a Jewish? And she's not. Surprisingly, her younger lover, Nathan, is a Jew, but what we can see in the novel is quite opposite to what we would expect to see. He's the one who is the perpetrator in their relationship. He's the one asking her, how did you survive? alleging that there were some not so moral ways that she was able to survive Auschwitz. And as I have already said, the novel is fictional. Sophie may did not exist, but everything what is in this book about actually existed. So the process of us getting to know her identities is very gradual, both for us as readers and for Stingo. Her storytelling is a kind of a delayed. It is everything but linear. As we were able to see, she was just putting things aside, which is not at all unusual, because it was so existentially devastating and highly traumatizing for her. And it is in life with the most important things, the one which are the most painful for Sophie, coming at the very end to our knowledge. And this is realistic too. But we were able to hear from the second generation survivors that they were getting to know about Holocaust stories of their parents slowly and gradually. And also, this is not hard to understand from the point of view of psychology. In order to reveal our story, we have to build a trust relationship with another person, be it even a reader. Also, we have to dig into ourselves. Our confessions have to have some kind of consistency. We have to give meanings to our activities. And in order to do that, we have to be able to process, to understand ourselves, and so on. And there will be a lot of things that are very hard to understand, even by Sophie herself, by herself. Another angle for not letting things out by Sophie is that other people just did not believe. Other people knew that it was so hard for Holocaust survivors in the camps, but they also thought that it had to be so hard that the survivors mixed up the reality with illusions. Viktor Frankl, another survivor, a psychiatrist, wrote a book, Why Didn't You Kill Yourself? It was one of the most common questions he was asked by people after the liberation of Auschwitz. People were approaching him and asking, how come that you did not kill yourself? And finally, what is the most important feature of Sophie's character after Auschwitz? It's trauma. Clearly, Sophie is vulnerable, but also she is resilient. She has strengths, a lot of them, but trauma is prevailing. Her experience of choices is the source of her trauma. The choice that made people in Auschwitz to be against each other and to be even against them. Very briefly, facts about Sophie's life in Auschwitz. It was 1943 when she arrived. It was the 1st of April. It was that Sophie moved from Krakow to Warsaw. Her husband and her father, both university professors, were killed by Germans. Her 2 children, Jan and Eva, were with her, and her mother was alive but sick. In order to feed her mother, she provided some illegal meat, part of a hen. There was 4 kilos of it, and she was caught. She was imprisoned first by the Gestapo and then sent to Auschwitz. She spent 20 months there, got out alive, or at least almost alive, actually very sick. Her transitory post was a center for displaced persons in Sweden, where she tried to commit a suicide, or even though she's in denial of this, she says, this was true, Stingo. I had no more emotions. I was beyond healing, like there was no more tears on me to pour on the earth. Since she was expecting that she's going to the USA, she started learning English, and then finally she arrived to the States in very bad condition. So what were the lessons learned in our today's language for Sophie after Auschwitz. Quote, "There is one thing that is still a mystery to me, and that is why, since I know all this, and I know the Nazis turned me into a sick animal like all the rest, I should feel so much guilt over all the things I done there and over just being alive. This guilt is something I cannot get rid of, and I think I never will." She paused again and then said, "I suppose it's because," but she hesitated, failing to round out her thought, and I heard a quiver in her voice, perhaps more because of exhaustion now than anything else. Then she said, "I know I will never get rid of it, never. And because I never get rid of it, maybe that's the worst thing the Germans left me with." There are two central things of her guilt, two taboos that the reader gets to know towards the end of her story. The first, less painful, is her 10-day relationship with Rudolf Hess, the camp commander, and the second is the most painful, her arrival day to the camp. So what were these taboos? What were these Sophie's choices, and so on? The narrator is actually talking about Sophie being at the same time the victim and perpetrator in Auschwitz, but the things are not black and white. They are very gray. She was in something that was not normal, and also we from outside, and now, not to mention 1979 when the book was published, we are, of course, even though some things are rather universal, and we are talking now about really universal things, we just have some different maybe rules of normality and so on. So the first, you can read, I do not need to read, it was her choice of a child who is going to go to a guest chamber, and she opts for her son and not for her daughter because she thinks that Jan, her son, has better chances to survive first in the camp, and then she is hoping that he can become a part of a program that could, Lebens program that could take him out of Auschwitz, find him foster parents in Germany, and make him alive, yes, without her, but anyway, alive. Second, it is her relationship with Rudolf Hess, the camp commander. You can read it here, and there is something even more persuasive from the thing. She said, quote, "I must move quickly. If I was to, yes, I will say seduce, yes, even if it makes me sick sometime when I think of it, hoping that somehow I could seduce him with my mind rather than my body." And the third thing is her anti-Semitism. You can also read it from here. These feelings are, on the one hand, presented in her deep emotional status of disintegration, intensified by Nathan, who is a Jewish violence. She was so chaotically in love with Nathan that it was like she was insane. We read these words about her anti-Semitism as the scream on Nathan, and generalized scream towards Jews. And also there is another thing, we get to know that her law professor father was actually very anti-Semitic. that he wrote a pamphlet that she had with her in Auschwitz, and she wanted actually to approach to Hess with that pamphlet, to show him anti-Semitic pamphlet and to say, hey, I'm not like others, I really also don't like those. And now I'm coming to the end. There are three cornerstones or milestones of her post-Holocaust integration. First, it is Auschwitz. I talked about that previously, about its profound impact. On the other hand, the narrator says she was determined to put behind her the madness of the past, or as much as the vulnerable mind permitted. And so, for her, the huge city became the new world in spirit as well as fact. She found music, she found books, she was happy to be alone again. She didn't have any privacy, both in Fiden camp and in Auschwitz before that. She found her part-time employment, she found love, and she wanted to have her life, let's say, normal again. Another thing is not being a Jewish. It was very, in my opinion, important dimension of her integration. From the one hand, from the point of her belonging to Polish, because there were frequently Polish were seen as collaborators with the Nazi, and Holocaust was also seen as specific Jewish trauma. There were a lot of organized movements to support Jews, not the rest at that moment. There was also Polish Jews Association of former Jewish concentration camp inmates and partisans committing to assisting newly arrived survivors, but Sophie did not engage with other survivors. We do not see her interested in building a sense of connection with others. Her goals were, as I mentioned, to survive, to be normal, and she simply kept her grief private, did not belong to any of the organizations, and actually maybe it was somehow good and maybe somehow it was not good for her smooth integration. And also what was smooth or not smooth for survivors to integrate in the United States of America in 1947. On the one hand, the world was just getting to know the horror of fascism. Styron writes, full revelation had been slow yet certain. The first news of the camp atrocities had been made public, of course, in the spring of 1945, just as the European war ended. It was now a year and a half later, but the rain shower of poisonous detail, the agglomeration of facts, peeling up at Nuremberg and at trials elsewhere, like mountainous, unmentionable dung heaps, began to tell more than the consciousness of many could bear, even more than those numbing early news clips of bulldozed cardboard cadavers suggested. As she watched Nathan, Sophie felt she was regarding a person in the grip of a delayed realization, as in one of the later phases of shock. Until now, he simply had not allowed himself to believe, but now he believes. All right. And finally, for further thinking, for us, as someone who should, who has to react and who has their natural reactions to evil and to the good. And this is something that I would like to call it aesthetics of a silent shock, transferring into a scream. I just paused a couple of questions. What were really the ways for Sophie to live a normal life? After everything happened, Žarka was talking about mothers hiding with their children and being killed with their children. It was not her choice how to live with it. Do we change and how we interpret justice, injustice, guilt, innocence, cooperation, resistance, morality, immorality? There is so many things which are not heroic. And finally, where is our empathy? Are we overwhelmed by traumatizing history? What would our morale say, and what would we do in such situation? Thank you very much. Oh.
Thank you, Natalija. Great. Can we have back Žarka on the screen, and we can then start our discussion? I would first give actually opportunity to you. So if somebody felt inspired or want to add something, ask a question before. Okay. Okay, so I wanted to ask you,
Okay, I'm here.
No, please. No, I think, yeah, I think that all of our presenters will be very happy to hear your questions. So please.
I have a small question for Žarka and also for Katarzyna Taczyńska. For Žarka is, if she is here, if you would be in a position to make a program for example, textbooks in Serbian language and literature in high schools, in secondary schools, would you choose some of these short stories, for example, for this potential textbook, and which of those it would be? Should I ask a question for Katarzyna or later?
Maybe we hear both questions and then.
Well, it was precious to hear verses in Yiddish, and thank you. And the question is about that 1935 moving to Minsk. Is this year important? Is it important that this is right that year, or it's the random year?
Okay, so Žarka first, and then Katarzyna will.
Okay. First of all, thank you, Stana, for question. Definitely, we should prepare some textbook from elementary and secondary school. And while I'm reading the Jewish Almanac, I have idea to definitely we need to collect in one place that short stories of women writers and published, and I think it will be very important. In this moment, I don't know which selection I would make, but I will try to cover the whole diversity of female experiences presented in their story. And what was very interesting for me is that, as I said, Ivan Ivani was the editor of literary section, and some of them today canonical writers of Serbian or Yugoslav literature published in Jewish almanacs, such as Danilo Kiš, Filip David, Đorđe Lebović, Ivan Palalić. So literary section really nurtured the high aesthetic standards, and texts written by women writers also are very, very interesting in poetic, not just in the context of the representation and thematic corpus, but they're really very interesting literary texts that deserve interdisciplinary researchers and scrutiny definitely. But of course, we should prepare some anthologies or textbooks from the schools, but of course for the broader reader public in today.
Thank you, Katarzyna, please.
For her, definitely, but politically or in any different perspective looking at this, not really. There is a huge difference between 1920s and 1930s generally in this literature and culture, because in the first part of this period, there was much more space for expressing freely Jewish identity. So it was still possible to write, for example, about writers like Sholem Aleichem, and even Sara Kagan, I found one of her poems written before this second decade, when she described the conflict between old and new, but using a lot of religious motifs. This poem doesn't appear in the books, so it wasn't published later. So I don't know, but I suppose it was important for her. If we can find any, I haven't found yet any additional reason yet for that year specifically.
Okay, please.
So I have a question for Katarzyna, and I wanted to know, since you mentioned that Sarah's poetry isn't really talked about much in Belarus, and I was wondering if there actually are any female Jewish poets that are, for example, that their poems are being taught in schools or generally talked about, especially when we consider current Belarus right-wing government, or is that something that's not really taught or talked about and is kind of pushed aside?
She doesn't exist in Belarus right now. I discovered her thanks to my friend and my student who worked with me in one cultural project. And I was looking for Jewish writers from that region specifically. So help to her, I collected all these poems written by Sara Kagan. And now even these texts from Belarus, which I received, they are not in distribution. So I can't go, and nobody can go to the archives there and to copy them. So she doesn't exist there, but I also met, and I forgot to show you the last slide from my presentation. Can you show the last slide? Because there is the poster from the project created by a young scholar from Belarus who now lives in Lithuania, and she prepared interesting project. It's not the last one. This is the last one. Yeah. And she prepared cards with pictures of Jewish writers from that region. And in this project appeared also Sara Kagan. So there is something in the, there is something. I mean, that some people know her. If she appears also in historical monographs, she appears only as a name and as a note, but that's it. Nobody reads her poetry, novels, or short stories.
Okay. Okay. All right, great. So I have a question for Katarzyna.
what was the status of Sara Kagan, like at the time when she was writing the poetry? Was she a known poet? Did she belong to some circle of poets? Like, so that's one question. And the second one is, is there like let's say, I don't know, a group, a network, a circle of poets whose work speaks to each other? Let's say Sara Kagan wrote her poetry, and then there were other members of the group. And I'm just trying to figure out, place her in a context, basically. And then I have a question for Natalija. And I wonder if you presented about just one, you presented analysis of one work. Did you find other similar narratives that speak to these themes that you discussed?
So, as I mentioned, I have little information about her life. And as I mentioned also, she was a member of editorial team of Yiddish literary journal Stern. So, and she was also, as I mentioned, a member of the Jewish section of the Writers' Union of Byelorussian. So she didn't have another option. If she wanted to write, she has to be a part of this formation, let's say. So at that time, there is no place for, let's say, avant-garde groups. It was just impossible. So this is the answer for your first question. I would really like to be able to study the reception of her poetry, reading these journals, but unfortunately, there is no possibility to do it right now, unfortunately. They are not digitized, so.
Thank you for the question. I didn't find similar examples. If anybody in the room knows for them, please tell me. We all know about examples from literature and from the real life that are quite opposite. Something is what Žarka was talking about. Also something that I read recently, a group of Jewish women and children who were forced to come partially by train and partially on foot from Šabac to Staro Sajmište. And Šabac is a town around 80 kilometers from Belgrade. There was one of the first camps in Serbia in Šabac, and at the very beginning of the war, Jewish women and the children were forced to come from Šabac to Staro Sajmište. All men were killed in Žarka, never mind at the moment. And there are so many stories that are true, in which, because it was very cold, in which children got frozen and died on that journey, and also children just died of exhaustion. And we have examples of mothers literally becoming insane because of the death of their child. And this is something that is canonized, and which is probably 99% of all situations. And we have we have so many things that are, let's say, problematic in Sophie, but we got to love her just because she's a human being. And this is, everything is awful. And if you didn't read the book, read it, because it is, in my mind, it is so perfectly mastered, the art of the writer, how just the moment when you think that the things cannot be worse, they are worse. And worse and worse and worse. So,
Thank you. Yes, we have a question here also, or a statement.
Yeah, this is more of a comment for Professor Perišić. I'm assuming I'm mispronouncing this. My apologies ahead of time. I am shocked that I have yet to read Sophie's Choice, and so I especially appreciate your presentation. And I think it's fascinating how what we expect of mothers, right, to sacrifice to be a good mother, which is of course still the expectation, but in presenting her with this choiceless choice, right, it forces us to ask different questions of her that are so much more multifaceted. And it really does like draw out this complexity in her character that gives her different dimensions, but it forces us to see a different part of how we're looking at her and evaluating her choices. And so I think that's especially brilliant part of it.
Thank you. I'm actually, my alma mater is social policy and social work. And it was something that I will reflect upon now, is also something that we started discussion only recently. It is, can you be a social worker working with children if you're not a mother? I mean, of course that you can. And of course that you can understand a pain of another person. I don't have to have my child dead in order to be able to understand a person whose child is dead. It is enough just to think of somebody I really love. How would I feel if she is dead? Or also, I think it is even enough for everybody to think of any of the moments in which we thought that something very bad happened to somebody we love, in order to understand the pain and how it can be devastating. Even though I must admit that there are evidence from the social policy and from social work field that say that sometimes it is better for somebody to be something. For example, in Serbia, in current situation, we have and I'm very sorry that this doesn't have any connection. We have a very small percentages of Roma children vaccinated. And it was for ages like that. But at the beginning of 2000, there were healthcare facilitators introduced. And these are Roma women. They're paid by the ministry. They have their job, and their job is to enter the Roma community and to talk to Roma parents why it is important to have your children vaccinated. And really, the percentages of Roma children vaccinated are higher. And for example, I'm very happy all the time when we have at social work Roma students, because they just get to speak better, it looks, to Roma community who are welfare recipients. So, I mean, it has for sure a lot to do with the trust. And also, what I was thinking when we were discussing about insiders and outsiders, it is, how to say, Roma people really don't trust me because I'm the representative of society who is suppressing them all the time. And I think that they have mutual understanding of their collective identity thing.
Thank you. Thank you. Someone else? I also wanted to ask, do any of the panelists maybe want to ask questions of another panelist? This is usually.
No, no, I think that I'm tired, but I would like to add something to the previous question. This literary artwork is totally in Yiddish, so it's also who speak Yiddish today. And of course, I speak too. So, and I believe that here we have people who speak Yiddish, but in Belarus, not really. And there is some translations from Yiddish into Byelorussian, but only few poems. They are pretty new, and they were chosen, I believe, they are very, very special and chose because of political situation. So still we have only very just some aspects taken from this poetry, and it's not even the overview. So still I think that there is a place and maybe interest to do this.
So apologies for now doing this after you said Katarzyna retired. I'm guessing, yeah, it's intensive and it's getting harder and harder to survive 3-day conferences. So I'm guessing well, but I want to ask one question of the three of you. So I just wanted to, like, from your own research, your perspective. I'm interested actually in the medium itself that these women that you spoke about, the characters, chose. So in terms of Sara Kagan, it is poem, it is poetry. In terms of women writing in the Jewish Almanac, it's just a prose literature, like short stories. And in terms of Sophie's choice, the question will be the same. What would you think how the medium itself, the form, played a role in what you yourself got out as analyzing the narrative? But also, what do you feel? Because I do believe that all three of you really went into deep, close reading of these case studies. Do you feel you can find some intention, like that you could find somewhere, like what did the author want when he was combining these narratives for Sophie's choice? What did Sara Kagan want mostly, or she of course wanted many things to do through the point, and you explore many of them, but what would you say was this intent expressed through the medium itself, if you understand? Also, Žarka, for you, like, for any of examples that you, thank you so much. So yeah, Katarzyna, go.
During interwar periods, literary texts were very, very important tool to express political approach. So it was the medium to do it. So if you want to build the new intelligentsia like they wanted to do, then in Soviet Union there is literary text for sure. So in Sara Kagan's case, poetry was one of the genre, but also she, as I mentioned, she wrote a novel and also short stories. And yeah, maybe I will give space to the rest. So it was a tool to express.
This is actually very interesting. I mean, of course, this is being done, and especially when we're talking about the avant-garde in general, but it's actually, I think it's quite important that I would actually read or understand your lecture, maybe even more differently, or taking these political readings even more seriously, having these others. And I think it's very interesting how these things are overlapping. So upstairs we have art and the Holocaust, so like we are presupposing we're not going to discuss politics in any way. And here, like, I'm just, for me, it's very interesting what the medium itself carries. And I would love to read more and have this kind of analysis. So thank you so much for that answer. Natalija, you want to go?
I will now prove to be the most biased person that you know. I have to admit that I didn't prove the movies. And why am I biased? Because reading the novel, you could never say that the main character will be Meryl Streep. Yes, because, you know, the way Styron is depicting Sophie, she's very, very attractive. And that is the main, her, how to say, characteristics. And she's tiny and small and so on. And when you think of a Meryl Streep, she's not really an example of beauty. That was my, you know, I was like, okay, oh my God. But also I'm of the person, I'm in those people who don't like watching movies after reading the book. Sometimes it showed that it was not a good idea to have a film after the book. But what is my dilemma? Actually, the things that are the focus of the book are from 1947, and the book was from 1978. 32 years passed. You know, he was writing in 1979 about the things in 1947. And I think that for that reason, it could be that the book is very mature. That I don't think that the book could be that profound, in my opinion, that he would wrote it in the 90s, in the 50s, for example. That is my opinion, and I'm sure that I think that Styron actually wanted to develop a vocabulary, how to offer one understanding of a Holocaust.
No, I agree. I mean, it's so different when you listen, especially give such a good analysis, and when you listen to it from our perspective, it sounds like this perfectly scholarly, like a very well done school assignment of these very crucial tropes that we find in the concentration camp universe, in the basic ethical questions. So it's actually, I mean, 70s, yeah, so we are starting from this period. Of course, it's very early, so these are one of the first, we still don't have what we got in the 90s and 2000s, this explosion of Holocaust narratives, both fictional and memorial. But for me, it's really interesting. It almost sounds like he had an educational intent. Like, I want to make this mishmash, I mean, to connect all these things that we find in such separate historical, real life stories. And I was interested in that. Like, why would the person even do that? Like, why did he use fiction when there were so many real life horror stories? I mean, of course, we know today so much about why people use fiction, but I was interested also in this. Like, it really looks very intensely constructed, if I can say. Sophie's choice.
Also, yes, and also I said in the beginning, it was made based of stories of some persons, of some women that really existed. One of them was Olga Lengel. There is Olga Lengel Institute for Holocaust Studies and Human Rights, and you can read on their site that her life story of Olga Lengel was partially a basis for Sophie's choice. So yes, I was also very.
That's good.
Yes, and also how he writes about Rudolf Hess and how he writes about the horror when Sophie sees his face in the newspaper. It is really something. And also she was a victim of some, we would say today, sexual assault in the underground. And it also brings her memories of a female couple who was actually assaulted sexually her in Auschwitz, but it is totally another.
Thank you, Natalija, so much. I'm for sure going to check this out because, especially in the gender perspective, I think it would be interesting to compare this real life story and how this author, male author, in the end, like use this to construct this story. So,
Žarka, very sorry, just a moment. Vera, too. Of course, I read the book in Serbian, but in order to be able to put all those quotes, I wanted to buy book in English. But then I found free PDF. So if you just put it on the internet, you can find free PDF and download, and your journeys along. You can, even though it's really...
In some countries, they arrest you for this. I'm kidding. It's probably, no, I'm kidding. Probably really free. Just a little joke for them. Thank you so much, Natalija. That's really useful. Žarka, let's...
Okay, I will be short. Thank you for the question. It's one of my main questions. Why fiction and no non-fictional text in Jewish Almanac? And I have some assumptions, of course. Maybe because of the official discourse of socialist memory culture. And as we know, there was not much demand for the autobiographical in 50s, 60s. And maybe because there is now some important position of women in traditional autobiographical and memoirs literature, but because there is intention. And I really think that the Jewish Almanac is collective project of group of women writers. I think that they choose fiction because I think they thought that fiction is better channel to communicate such experiences, and fiction provides some privilege that non-fiction doesn't have. At the first place, they have an active position. They can creating memory narratives. They manipulate with materials, and they construct certain narratives, and they are very narrative clever. And I would like to analyze it very all this story, but you can see that there is a certain strategies, and they use fiction with a reason, and there is a tension to legitimize some traumatic experience in the public sphere. And I think that fiction is, for them, I don't know, better field for experimentation in that way. In the context of Yugoslav literature, we can say that in that period, the traumatic narratives are, we don't have such kind of literature in the main traditional mainstream culture and tradition. So I think that fiction provides much more privilege and codes for constructing memories, narratives.
Natalija, very shortly, then we have to run. Yes. They're waiting for us.
Žarka, I could not agree more. Orhan Pamuk, when he wrote Istanbul, he said that half of his family didn't speak to him. Maybe they just didn't want to say I experienced and so on. And I suppose that the communist morale also was on the high spirits.
Vera, for those of you who read Yiddish, one of Sara Kagan's poems is digitized in Yiddish Book Center. So maybe the Stern no, but this book is. So if you would like to read it, you can find it there. Thank you.
And for those who not, you're going to translate it, right, Katarzyna? Very soon. A book, we're talking a book. But can we have another one round of applause for all of our panelists and for all of you? So for this great conference. Žarka, we are sorry you're not here with us. Hope you're feeling well.
Yes.
and another time. So guys, we're just going to have a quick closing of the conference on the fourth floor. We're on the first floor, on the fourth floor. So just please go straight there, and Žarka, see you soon.
Bye. See you.